Welcome to the Lessons Learned podcast, a podcast reflecting on the lessons we've learned and those we're still in the process of learning. I'm Komal, your host. I'm an interviewer, investor, and someone who has lived a lot of life in a short time. I built this podcast as a place for us to reflect, to be together, and to learn from one another. Let's get into it. Today's episode of Lessons in Resilience. I am so excited to be interviewing Cassandra today, the founder of Cosmos, also known on Instagram as Join the Cosmos. We're going to be talking about her recent transition in her career and life, and we're going to be talking about community building for communities that look like us, and we're going to be talking about so much more. Hello.
Hi. Oh, that was so weird. I was like, it's not letting me.
No, I'm so glad it's worked out for us to do this face-to-face ever since we were able to profile Join the Cosmos on CourseSpace. We've kind of been in each other's worlds, but now we finally get to chat and catch up with all of these wonderful people here on IG Live. But first I want to see, how are you today? How is your heart today?
Thank you for asking that question. I'm feeling pretty grounded. This is my last day in California with my family, and usually it's pretty chaotic the last day. There's so many things you want to do, errands you got to run. Oh crap, I didn't pack and I need to head to the airport. But I did all of that stuff yesterday so that I can just be present with, the couple meetings I have today and the rest of the time I have with my family. Feeling very lucky. I got to visit for, 10 days for the first time all year prior to what looks like, a really big wave and maybe another round of lockdowns. So I feel like I'm in the eye of the storm and just, trying to soak it up as much as I can before I go back to New York.
I love that so much. And also soaking in that sun, I am sure.
It might have been 85 degrees on Sunday, but I'm not going to brag. But it's also nice to be here with you too. Sahaj, I think, messaged me yesterday to say she's so excited to see her worlds collide, and obviously was a big fan of CourseSpace when you were still running it, and been following ever since, your journey, your evolution.
Thank you so much, Cass. And you're on a key part of your evolution right now. I was just catching up on your last Instagram Live, and you have called in and owned a new term or identity for yourself, and that of spiritual teacher. And I'd love to talk about this transition and how you've come into this space of owning this new world and new identity. And I would love to hear first, I know for myself as a South Asian woman, the wellness space has been so co-opted and just owned by white folks. And so even myself, when I have been entering personal development, or, I call myself a resilience educator, it's taken me years to own this identity because I never felt like I belonged in the space of personal growth and development, of healing, of supporting people in this work. And it took me, years to feel embodied in this identity. So for yourself, you touched on this a little bit as well in your live. What has the journey been like for you to come into this identity and own it in its fullness and to see yourself in this light?
I'm so glad I had breakfast. That's a beauty question. I'm just kidding. I love that we just get to dive in. And again, I also want to affirm you taking up space in the personal development and speaking and coming into your power. I'm sure there's a book in your future as well. I'm already seeing it, and I affirm you in that. I think in a lot of different ways in my life, I have very much felt like a black sheep, and, the person that was on the outside looking in, wanting to fit in, wanting to be seen and accepted, wanting to, be normal in a lot of different ways, whether it was from childhood, just the fact that I had a flat nose and I was Asian, and, I wanted to be blue-eyed and blonde haired, or coming into college, I felt like it seemed like everyone around me knew what they wanted to do. And on the inside, I felt so lost, but because I had never really grown up, having people around me who emulated self-referencing behaviors. I was consistently looking outside of myself for validation or for direction, not recognizing that I have an internal compass that I can rely on. And so, I had a series of events when I was like 22 that really, really threw me to a rock bottom. It was a brutal breakup. It was the realization that, oh, I spent 4 years telling myself I was going to go to law school, and here I am, miserable after taking the LSAT, really uninspired, hating my personal statement, about to like submit pay on these applications, and just realizing, ding, like, you're going to be fucking miserable. Like, and are you going to take 100K in loans for this? So, that was really when I said, oh my gosh, I can't go to law school. And I admitted that to myself, which was the first step, admitting it to myself. I was so afraid of admitting that I don't know. And so it was easier for me to hold on to any raft, any buoy, any ship, anything that looked like it was going anywhere, without realizing that that was in fact preventing me from really finding my path. So when that happened, I jumped around a couple different jobs, and I never had the cool job, like the cool tech job or like the sexy company. I did a bunch of different things that eventually led me into consulting, which, as anyone who's ever done consulting before might say, it's what you do when you don't know what you want to do, because they're going to tell you what to do. They're going to throw you around in different projects, and you're going to try different things, and you're going to learn about different companies. So I was forced to let go of all the things that I thought I knew I wanted, because I hit a moment where up until now, it just wasn't working. I was so unfulfilled, and I was more lost than I was before. And so in accepting that I was lost, I could actually start finding my way. I could actually start figuring out well, what do I want? I can ask questions of myself that I was too afraid to prior. And right around that same time was when my spiritual journey happened, which is funny, right? Like when you hit rock bottom, that is the moment where, a lot of the illusions melt away and you're left with nothing but truth. And in order to cope with the real pain and discomfort I had of many of these structures that I built for myself, which were illusory anyway, falling apart, I needed something to anchor into. So I had found yoga in 2012 because I was experiencing chronic back pain right around when I was 21 in college, which was very abnormal for someone of that age, right? I was very lucky, able-bodied, didn't have any chronic conditions, and yet I would have days where I couldn't get out of bed because my lower back would be searing and hot and tight, and I would have to pop Advil and wait to curl out of bed. It was very troubling. And, at this time, nobody was really talking about mental health or somatics, or the ways that repressed emotions that were unprocessed can also manifest as physical symptoms. So went to doctors, chiropractors, people couldn't really tell me what was going on. And so I Googled, found a yoga class, and figured, what, if this can save me doctor's bills, let me just show up and try it. All of those things, I think, together really put me onto a path of, now that I know that the truths that I was looking outside of myself are not for me, where do I go to find the truths that are mine? And that journey led me inward. That journey led me to the mat. That journey led me to my first yoga teacher, Bianca Furin. So she still teaches out in LA. She is a master teacher trainer, yin yoga teacher, and hearing the ways in which she would cue and sequence and ask her students to reflect on things that seem so small, like, where can you let go? Where can you breathe a little more deeply? Are you pushing because you need to be, or because you're used to it? All of these little questions that seemed at the surface level, of where my consciousness was at that time, minor, started to kind of seep into the little cracks of my soul and my body, and heal me, or lead me to a path to heal myself, to understand myself. So that was really the beginning of the spiritual journey. And I feel like I have just grown and grown my capacity, my hunger, my appetite for truth, which is what I really think a spiritual practice is about. It's separate, different from religion for me, because religion tells you what truth is. Spirituality asks you to have a direct experience, to know for yourself, which is to have an experience with it in your body, right? Talking about embodiment. And, it asks you to be skeptical. It asks you to bring your doubts and your questions and your fears and your anxieties to the table just as much as you're willing to bring your faith and your trust in yourself. And that to me is the most beautiful way that I have found to live, to carry both and to live in that duality and figure out, well, what does union and connection look like? And that's the yogic way of life I've adopted. I have so much of my livelihood to thank to Indian culture, to yoga, to the thousands of years of healing arts that have been passed on to the world. Like my family right now, we're all taking Ayurvedic herbs at home. So it's just like, it's completely changed my life to be in spaces where I've been able to learn from Indian culture, from yoga teachers who take their lineage very seriously. And, that means also dealing with the ways in which it's culturally appropriative in the West. But I'm just so, so grateful that these practices exist and they have been shared with the world.
Mm-hmm. So within your Vietnamese identity, what has that experience been like to step into this new role as spiritual teacher? Have you felt that stigma? Or any stigma around it? Have you felt like, was that a challenge for you within your identity to step into this truth?
So the term spiritual teacher that I just started using for myself, like you said, it's very new. It's like it's almost like it's a fragile identity that's just kind of been birthed out of the cocoon recently, and I'm still playing with how it feels. But the reason why I chose that was because as I deepen my practice of yoga or my teaching of yoga, I have found that yoga is just one gateway into so many universal truths. And if you go through the gateway of Reiki, you go through the gateway of Kabbalah, every gate leads you back to the same thing. And so the more and more that I learn, that I consume, that I am able to process and alchemize across these different philosophies and traditions, I just realize it all leads back to how do we be more of ourselves and how do we live in our truth so that we can create that truth and bring our internal world out into the external world. So it just started feeling very myopic or inaccurate just to say that I am a yoga student or teacher, because the way I operate and see the world is really through a lens of direct experience with spirituality. It wasn't hard for me to accept it, but I think it was hard for me to communicate it to other people. But I just consistently had a lot of friends or people who have come to know me on Instagram, people who I've met through different circles, friends of friends like you and I here today, who have shared with me that I have a gift, and it's the way that I carry myself, and it's the way in which I share what I am learning through the creation of culture. Like, I really care about taking the esoteric and bringing it down to the everyday. And I cannot help it because it just informs the lens through which I view the world and how I operate. So when one thing changes me, I change, and then everything around me changes. And that's the case for all of us. But I take that responsibility really seriously, because I know anything that passes through me will affect generations afterwards. It means that I can end generational curses or intergenerational trauma in my family. I can make better decisions. And that ripple effect, makes all of us so, so, so powerful. So my family, I think they know I'm spiritual. They think it's a little strange, probably, because there's like the superstition spiritual that my family grew up with, that I think is so baked into Asian culture. And, I think them seeing me kind of come full circle now to adopt spirituality of my own volition as an adult has been really interesting, because everyone else in my family, they're not religious, nor are they very spiritual. I think they're more culturally spiritual, in the sense of like, you go to temple because you're supposed to, incense means certain things, but it's very layered into Asian culture as opposed to being just purely spiritual or just purely religious.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm actually a little strange to them. As an example, in my suitcase, I'm taking this Kuan Yin statue that my parents no longer use, and I'm like, I'm bringing it back for my altar. And my mom's like, what? You want this thing? Like, the monk blessed our house and gave it to us like 20 years ago when we bought the house. So
you're like, yes, Mom, I do want that. Let me take some of that back.
You guys put her into like a cabinet and just shoved her away. So I'm gonna give her a home in New York. And so she's wrapped in my sweater in my suitcase. So they're just like, yeah, okay, take it. It's been in the closet for 10 years, but whatever.
the reason I ask this is, again, because I just even find, like, as a South Asian woman, I'm a trained yoga teacher as well. And when I came out of my yoga teacher training, it was so strange because I was like, this is part of my lineage. Like, this is part of my inherited identity.
Yeah.
Yet it's so hard for me to own and to take on, especially in this wellness and well-being space. So I'm always curious what that's like for other BIPOC folks as they navigate being in the wellness space. But what I love about how you describe your journey is it's simply embodiment. So it's not taking an identity, it's being your identity. And really feel that through your groundedness and through your presence just here right now, but also in how you share with the world. And so something you said earlier was, you know, when you realized the answers weren't outside of you, they weren't externalized, they were actually part of your inner guidance system. And how do you tune into that knowing, that part of you that has the information that we all need? What advice would you have for those who are watching to tune into that inner guidance system for themselves, especially in the chaos that we are in right now?
Oh, this is such a juicy question. And this is because I firmly believe, I don't like the word underrepresented. I think those of us who've been historically and like kept out of institutions and structures of power, I think the reason why it has been hard for us to come back to our spirituality, our ancestral lineage, like you said, the things that are rightfully ours, our inherited identities, is because, like, we cannot talk about that without reckoning with how violent Christianity has been. Like, Christianity forever changed the world. It caused wars. It led to complete genocide of groups of people, right? And so, of course, it's hard for us to come back into these things because in our own bodies, we have had to repress maybe our practices, we've lost our traditions, we've needed to, like, in order to survive. Like, so it really is a privilege for me to be at this point where it's safe for me to explore these things, because I don't know that's the case for my parents, don't know that's the case for other people in my line. And so now what I find so empowering about spirituality and about, like, and spirituality as a tool or mechanism for connecting with ourselves is not only in practicing it, is it a form of activism and a form of healing, but we are creating, I think, like, space for other people who might have experienced the same shame and the same, you know, heady mix of feelings that comes with decolonization work within ourselves, to start to be open to the idea that they can also go there. They can also unpack and figure out what's really for them. But this is also why I'm so passionate about spirituality. It really is, for me, a practice, a ritual of activism, of decolonization, of coming back to who we are at the simplest kind of definition of it. And to your question about how for folks to kind of tap into that intuition and inner knowing, what I needed to do first and foremost before I could even begin, and it's a lifelong thing. Like, I still have moments where I question myself, where I doubt, where I hem and haw and, like, wait to say what I really want, because I am constantly working on removing white supremacy, removing capitalism from myself, and so that the truest parts of me can shine. But I needed to remove the noise. And I think that is the scariest thing in the beginning. And by removing the noise, it meant I first had to assess in my life, what is going on? Like, how can I just start to have more awareness about what is working for me and what is not? And how can I notice, like, how much time am I carving out for myself, and how much time am I consistently giving away to everything and anyone that asks anything of me? Because I was that person. I was really addicted to the idea of climbing the ladder, to hustle culture. You know, this is 22, 23-year-old me, really addicted to being everything for everyone. I'm also an Enneagram 2, which is the giver.
I'm a 2 as well.
Oh, yes. And I'm an older sister, and I'm also the strong friend. So this is a very kind of, like, crappy combination if it's done without boundaries. So I learned all of that the hard way. I was like, and I became resentful because I was never there for myself when I needed it, because I was giving away all the goods, all the juice, all the energy to anything else that asked anything of me. So that was really my first step of, like, creating those boundaries so that I had spaces to be with myself and to really hear like what I needed to hear, like to connect with my body and ask myself like, well, what do you need? What are you feeling today? Did you eat yet? Are you sleeping enough? Do you like this person? Why are you talking to them? You know, all of these questions, like the questions that my yoga teachers of past and present would like seamlessly weave into a class, right? I needed to seamlessly weave that into my everyday consciousness because it was so just not the way I grew up or like I just didn't question myself, and it was I was second to everything. So that was the first step, creating that space just so I can start to notice and then probe and question made all of the difference, and everything followed from that. But without creating that space, without moments of silence and solitude and really becoming comfortable with who you are on your own, I could never have noticed these things because the distractions are so addicting.
They're so addicting, and it's built into us. Every
Mm.
part of society is here to distract us from that truth, from that leaning into who we are. And I don't know for you, I mean, you're home right now, so I wonder what this is like for you. But I was back with my family for 2 months after we had a loss in the family. And
Mm.
it was really interesting because for all of my growth and development, I was able to sustain a lot of, who I truly am while I was at home. But there was a lot of regression that happened for me too.
Mm-hmm.
We can be triggered by our family. We can, go back into old roles and old behaviors. But when I came back, I was able to see that contrast and give myself, celebrate myself and give myself grace for this growth that I've had since I was young. So when you look back, how do you recognize or celebrate your journey of growth?
uh, Family, I think, is the hardest. Like if this were a video game, family is like the final boss in the video game, right? Like
Yeah.
you thought you grew, you changed. Family is that final level in the video game that you really get to test out how much work you've done and if it's really been integrated into your system. Um, and I also think as I've gotten older, and I especially attribute some of my growth to the book All About Love by Bell Hooks,
Mm.
but I've just been really grappling with how much we have been programmed as a society to place insane expectation and perfectionism onto our parents and onto our families, such that like, and this is separate from obviously like real pains, hurts, and traumas that maybe shouldn't have happened in everybody's unique family situation, but a lot of times our suffering is prolonged because we continue to hold on to the expectation that that person's going to change and then fix that hole, that person's going to give me closure. Nobody's giving you closure. You give yourself closure, and you give yourself, and you can decide like what relationship you want to have with someone that's going to create the outcome that best serves you. Like we have so much more autonomy than that I think is important to acknowledge, but we can't acknowledge it if we continue to believe that my family has to mean all of these things to me. Like, there's so many different configurations, and it's uncomfortable to admit, but I think especially as we near the holidays, it's important to center that we don't all have happy-go-lucky families. We don't all feel safe. We're not all at the point in our healing journeys where like going home is the best thing for us. Maybe being estranged for a couple of years actually is the best thing for you. Maybe going to therapy so that you have the tools to come back at some later date when you feel ready is the best thing, right? Like there's so many ways to show up. So I always think it's important to center that because I've gone through periods of estrangement with my own family, and I'm now able to come to a turning point where coming home, I feel more empowered than I do triggered.
Mm.
Because growing up, my whole philosophy I had a lot of conflict with my dad because again, I just was really headstrong. Like I did well in school, but I also wanted different things, and I have like tattoos and a nose ring now. Like I've just always wanted to do things my way, and freedom was always so important to me. Freedom and independence, which are two values in Asian culture, at least of our parents' generation, right, are really strange to them. And so growing up, I didn't have the wherewithal or the tools or the capacity to be compassionate. I just thought, well, if you don't accept me, then screw you. So
Mm.
scorched earth policy used to be my policy with my family
Yeah.
up until probably I was like 24, 25, not too long ago. Then at that point, you know, I had moved to New York, and I was across the country, and not seeing them as much gave me the distance to, I think, appreciate them, to love them in a different way. And also when I came home, it was like, well, I'm only here for maybe 2 or 3 times a year. Are we really gonna fight about this? It gave us this strange, like, much more, I think, objective perspective than if we were all so close and accessible to each other. Then I would feel like I could just start shit and drive off, right?
Yeah.
Or they could start shit and be like, well, you already live here, so we don't have to like treat this as special. Or you're already in LA, as I used to live in LA. That space, I think, gave us all a new perspective on like, well, how do we want to treat each other? Because we're not always together. We're not always going to be here at the dinner table. I've also done a lot of work. Like, I really credit Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Art of Communication, which, I mean, TLDR, basically, it's two really important takeaways. The importance of deep listening, like listening to hold space for the other person, not for you to interject or tell them they're wrong, you know, to let them express their truth, even if it's wrong, you know, even if you're going to refute it at some point. And then two, conscious communication, recognizing our words can either nourish or poison ourselves and the other people that we're speaking to. Learning that, embodying that, allowed me to like really think about, well, what's important here, being right or protecting my peace.
Mm.
And I choose to protect my peace these days because there's a lot of anxiety in the world. There's a lot of other things I would rather be stressed out about than, to the extent possible, you know, fighting with my family.
Yes, especially right now. And I'm so glad we got to touch on this, especially because the holidays are coming up, as you shared, and folks, you know, potentially will be seeing their family depending on COVID measures, or what they're deciding.
Mm.
It's it's really beautiful though when you do see that growth in yourself, and you're like, wow, like things used to be so different, and I'm just like even the 2 months that we were home, my brother and my sister-in-law and my niece and my nephews, they're all at my parents' house right now because they're
Yeah.
being backed up in their house. So we all
Oh
live
no.
under the same roof for the first time since high school.
Yeah.
And it was so beautiful. Like it was such a loving way to come back to each other. And so it feels so, it's really important and powerful for us to reflect on our growth and how far we've come. And so, as we wrap up our time together, I'd love to dive into this a little bit around how do you mark your milestones? So, I bring this up because we're doing a virtual year planning retreat, your best year, at the beginning of
Yeah.
December. The reason I wanted to do this was because research shows us that planning and organization can help, you know, decrease likelihood of depression, decreases anxiety, just gives us a chance to reground and then be in community around those plans and goals. But what does that look like for you? A key part of my planning process is celebration. Looking back, reflecting, take an inventory of what's
Mm.
happened. So, what does that look like for you? How do you celebrate your wins? How do you celebrate how far you've come in your journey, especially now as you are stepping into this identity more publicly? I really want to honor this because it's major.
Thank
Um,
you.
but how are you going about celebrating everything it took to get here?
I love that you're doing this workshop, this event, by the way. Like, I am a big fan of like planning, to creating just enough structure so that there's flexibility and spontaneity to go somewhere. So I'm really a big fan of that. I'll be honest that like I still struggle very much with celebrating, because for so long in my life, working, it was my coping mechanism for not feeling, for not needing to, like, for moving so fast that I don't have to sit and recognize the ways in which I, maybe haven't felt like accepted by society or have felt really hurt by different things in life. For a long time, moving fast, breaking things, and not giving myself space to process and whether something happened for me in the good way or bad way was how I operated. I've been on a journey this year of like slowing down and really intentionally undoing that, especially undoing the ways in which it's tied up to capitalism and the ways in which it allows me to continue to hurt and violate myself. I am definitely guilty for being the person who hurts me the most, like the way that I find my inner critic speaking to me. It took me a long time to even recognize, like, oh, this is harmful, because I'm so
Yes.
used to her being like really cruel and catty to me, and like telling me that like you can't stop until you're done with this. Like I'm so conditional with myself, yet I strive to be unconditional with others. So that is what I'm working through right now, which means like celebration still feels like a foreign activity to me. It's like I'm trying to work this muscle and put it through PT, and I'm just like, well, I don't know. I haven't really wiggled that part of my toe ever in my life. But we're trying. We're gonna put it in water and try. But it helps to have people like you who like to talk about celebration and who ask me these things, because it gets me to sit down and sit down and be uncomfortable with the fact that like, oh, like that means I'm giving myself attention for the things that I'm doing or good at. Like that's so weird. I'm not used to getting attention unless like I really work for it, or like love and attention and yeah, like gratitude and kindness from other people still feels like a little foreign to me, because I'm just so used to people not like either not letting people give it to me, because if I start to love it, that means if it goes away at some point, then it might feel like terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
Or, like in order to open up to that, I might also open to the pain of when it's not there. But that's life, right? Like pain and the pleasure come hand in hand. If we cut off one, we don't get the other. That's the same with life and death. Anything that's duality, we only know life is beautiful because there's death at some point. So I'm recognizing that as a really big lesson that I get to continually work on. Of you celebrate because life is suffering, as the Buddha said. It's
Mm-hmm.
suffering. We all suffer, but we can choose whether it's going to be pain or just like suffering. And I'm shifting from a place of like, I don't need to be in pain. I can be in pleasure as well. It's a new orientation for me. So that is to say, my milestones are probably these quiet moments when I'm just in my room and I finally take a breath and I'm like, oh, we did that. Like we did that. And you don't have to wait until you're like huffing and puffing at the finish line to just acknowledge yourself. Like it can be, take a little break on the sidelines along the way. So it's a new muscle I'm working on bringing that into my consciousness.
I love that. And I would agree wholeheartedly. And I want us to end on what we're celebrating today. And because of how you brought in the duality of, suffering and joy, I feel like it's something that I've been flexing a muscle around for the last few years, because there has been so much suffering in like in my life, just when it came to illnesses and recoveries and loss, these things. Yet, and today I want to share just like as my microcosm of that, because I woke up today after, and I needed this conversation. My soul needed this conversation, because the distraction that we're all experiencing in COVID can be back to our addictions, and work is an addiction for me. And so I'm enrolled back in school right now. We're launching our new product. We are doing all these things with the show and growing. And the distraction of work is powerful. And this morning, my period's also coming soon. And if COVID has made me more aware of anything, it is my emotional cycle during my period, and also the moon cycles and how align our bodies are with the moon cycles. And with the new moon coming up, with my period coming up, I woke up this morning and I just couldn't get out of bed. I'm having one issues right now as well. Yet something about radical self-love had come up on my feed. And in that moment when I saw it, it was, when I talk about resilience, the reason I do is because throughout our life, that timeline between when we fall off and when we like go to the nth degree of our self-hatred and then come back to neutral. For me, that frequency, or that what that bounce back in that space looks like, is the true test of my resiliency. And so this morning, we were over here. And the walk back took about an hour and a half.
Yeah.
But it included just me in a moment saying, you're still whole. You are still love. You are still God. You are still God's energy. And all that's making you question that is the illusion that we're in, is this illusion of life that we're in.
Mm-hmm.
And that walk back is what I want to celebrate today, because being on this live, for folks who, like to follow us online or look to us for our joy or guidance or whatever it is, it's so important for you to also know that these days are hard for all of us, but that we can walk each other back to baseline together through conversations like this, and through acknowledging these real things together. So that's my celebration, is the walk back I was able to do with myself today.
That's
What are
really
you
beautiful.
celebrating today?
I'm celebrating that this week I have been just so intentional about, in my meditations, in my visualizations, in the moments in between calls, of connecting to my vision of the world that I want to live in, the person I want to be to contribute to it, and remembering that I am a powerful co-creator with this universe, with source, with like God, with this energy, whatever you want to call it. And the more that I remember that, the easier it becomes for me to act upon it. And so I actually pulled some tarot cards last night, and have been working on putting my scarcity, my fears to bed, and letting them know no more. You're here to inform me. You're not here to control me.
Mm,
So that is what I'm celebrating. It's all these little ways that like I'm just pausing to recenter and reorient to my North Star, which is my highest vision for my life and for the world, and for love and healing and connection to happen for every living sentient being on this earth, and knowing that I am on the backs of ancestors, and I am an ancestor in the making as well.
mm. Thank you so much, Cass. I'm going to ask the audience, and I know that there's a bit of a delay on Instagram, but if you want to share what you're celebrating today in the comments, we'll stick around for a couple of minutes just to see those pull through. I know we're about 10 minutes over, Cass, so if you have to head out, please do. There's no, don't worry about sticking around, but I just want to
Okay,
take a little
cool.
bit
Yeah.
from you staying with us. But thank you so much for your time today, for all the work that you're doing. And I can't wait to continue to follow along with your journey and to learn from you and grow with you. And thank you for your time today with us.
Thank you for hosting this incredible series on lessons in resilience. Resilience is one of the most beautiful things that I think we get to work on, and that we get to hold each other through. And I love that visual you shared with everyone of walking back to the line. It reminds me of that Ram Dass quote, like, we're all just here to walk each other home. So thank you. I love you. I see you. And I'm so excited that we get to be in conversation together this morning.
I love you too, Cass. Safe travels back to New York.
Thank you.
And hugs to your whole family.
I'm excited to come back to see my cat, though.
Amazing.
Have a good one. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everybody, for joining for Lessons in Resilience today. I feel nourished. My cup feels full. My heart feels full. I want to share some of the things that you're all celebrating. Kim is celebrating being human and that she is enough. Danny is saying, I never thought that I need to be mindful daily of celebrating myself. This conversation was very insightful. I'm so grateful, Danny. Samukile says, celebrating courage and pushing past my limiting beliefs. Thank you for this beautiful conversation. Thank you all. And I want to remind you that our nervous systems deserve to have this kind of nourishment, to be a part of conversations that feel nourishing, relaxing, and that can help ground us again. And I know I'm guilty of this, especially in this busy season. A lot of us who are business owners, we're launching our Black Friday deals, and it's a very intense time because we're all trying to do our best when it comes to showing up in our businesses and our lives. But grace is important right now. Your heart is important right now. Caring for your well-being, for the people in your life, for your body. This is all critical right now. And so I encourage you to do just that today. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to use this as a moment to also remind you we're going to be opening registration for Your Best Year, our virtual year planning retreat, next Friday on Black Friday. And I am excited to have this next week be a nourishing one for me and my team as we get this launch complete, but also for us to plan our year together, to plan our 2021 together and make it our best year yet. I will see you guys on our next Lessons in Resilience next week. Stay tuned for the lineup. And I can't wait for all that's ahead for all of us. Sending you all of my heart today. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you loved this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you want to follow me, Gomal, check me out on Instagram at KOMALMINHAS or the show at lessonslearned.co. And if you have an idea of a lesson that we should dive into on the show, then slide into our DMs and submit there or on the website, along with any guests you think I should interview and talk all of the things with. As always, I hope that you make some time for you this week and reflect on the lessons you're learning or have learned, and take some time to celebrate all the incredible that is you. Until next time, guys. Bye!